container was delivered to Momona Airport, Dunedin. It arrived from Duxford, England, and inside was a dismantled airplane, a Messerschmitt ME-109J, one of the world's rarest aircraft owned by the Old Flying Machine Company Limited. This fearsome-looking aircraft is flown by Mark Hanna, whose father, Ray Hanna, is a former New Zealander. He joined the Royal Air Force and for 4 years led the jet fighter display team, the Red Arrows. This father and son team fly for filmmakers and also at air shows as a dogfight team. The presence of such a rare bird in New Zealand was made possible by the efforts of that well-known aviation enthusiast, Tim Wallace of Alpine Dare Group Limited.
Our organisation, our company name is the Old Flying Machine Company. We are based at the Imperial War Museum in Cambridge in England, and we're there courtesy of the Imperial War Museum. We are given hangarage, workshop facilities, purely in exchange for us doing some displays at their request. We've been operating there now for approximately 9.5 years. The 109 is the Spanish-built one. It has a Rolls-Royce 529 engine, which is a transport engine. From an operational point of view, it's a lovely aircraft. It's easy to maintain, pretty much looks after itself. We've just done a lot of work on the aircraft prior to the aircraft coming here to New Zealand. Anyway, we've operated the airplane now for 3 years. We've done a lot of film work with it. Films like Memphis Belle, Piece of Cake. There's a few other commercials as well. In comparison, the 109 in comparison to the Spitfire, there is a considerable difference. Namely that the 109 was an aircraft that was made in such a way for mass production which was easy for maintenance and general turnarounds. The Spitfire is somewhat more, much more complicated aircraft in its construction and downtime when it comes to repairs. And even by today's standards, when we fly and maintain the 109 and the Spitfire, that comparison that stood years ago is still as clear today. Both aircraft are good aircraft, and it's fair to say that the 109, despite its use back in the 40s, is a lovely aircraft. We enjoy operating the 109. We've had great success with it. Maintenance-wise, again, parts are very, very difficult, and this is the main problem that we do have with these old airplanes. For example, prior to coming here to New Zealand, we had a problem with the aircraft's radiators, and having only about 3 days left prior to bringing the aircraft here, I had to find a company in Denmark who would make us 2 Messerschmitt radiators. Although the expense was somewhat minimal in comparison to some aircraft parts, we just made it just in time. We had to delay the aircraft leaving the docks, but we did it all the same. For example, this aircraft uses Canberra nose tyres for its main undercarriage. These are now themselves becoming exceptionally scarce, and on a lot of items we have to approach individual manufacturers in England to ask them to produce us 1 or 2 items. And a lot of that is done on goodwill, so we do rely on people's goodwill to help us to keep these old machines in the air. One of our little problems was trying to lower the struts on the undercarriage so we could physically get the aeroplane into the container. At approximately 1:45, at 2:30 in the morning, we're driving this aeroplane around the airfield with a tractor, trying to stop it quickly so the undercarriage would come down, so the weight of the aeroplane down on the oleos would cause it to collapse so we could get the thing in the container. And one came down, the other one stuck up, and there's all these sort of little problems, you know, which you don't normally accustom. I mean, today, just getting the aircraft out is the easy part. All the hard work's done. But we've got quite a bit of work to do on the aircraft. Essentially, all the nuts and bolts to stick the thing together will take approximately a week on the outside. The propellers all got to be put back together and put back on. There's a lot of ground running, testing to be done prior to this aircraft departing out of here.
After assembly and testing, the ME-109J was flown over Dunedin and down to Invercargill, with the company of Tim Wallace in his Spitfire and the Corsair, an aircraft also part of the Alpine Fighter collection. Tim Wallace thrilled citizens of the Deep South with a spectacular aerial display, while the ME-109 was being refuelled by Mark Hanna at the Southland Aero Club at Invercargill Airport. The Corsair performed briefly at its first appearance in the South. After refuelling, Mark took off in formation with the accompanying aircraft and flew on to Queenstown and then to Wanaka. In the Alpine Fighter Collection hangars at Luggett, near Wanaka, a P40 Kittyhawk is in the last stages of restoration, with Ray Mulqueen, Chief Engineer for the collection, overseeing the reconstruction. Time's marching on, and with an air show due in 7 days, the team's working round the clock to prepare the aircraft for its test flight in time for the display. In June 1942, the Aleutian Islands were occupied by the Japanese invading forces, and a new war front opened up in that area, characterised by foul and changeable weather. For instance, of the 72 aircraft lost in the first few months of that combat, only 9 fell to the Japanese. In January 1943, Amchitika Island was captured, and P40 Kittyhawks were based there as fighter bombers. This particular P40K is one of 2 worldwide and was discovered engineless and upended on an abandoned airfield at Amchitika and shipped to the United States of America by Bob Sturgis when he learned that the location was to be used as a nuclear weapons test area. Subsequently bought by Tim Wallace, the aircraft was in poor condition, and the Alpine restoration team stripped the airplane to its smallest component and started a 4-year task of a meticulous rebuild. Tim Wallace was faced with a global search for suitable parts for patterns to replace those deemed to be unserviceable or suspect. Also at the last stages of preparation for the air show is a DHC-1 Chipmunk, one of 2 to be part of this year's program. Luggett Airport, quiet, rural and peaceful, 2 days before the air show. Painting a logo on the Alpine Fighters Collections building is being completed. The P40 is at the final stage of engine installation and the test run is overdue. Time inexorably passes as the engineers work at a seemingly leisure pace. But as Ray Mulqueen says, this bird will fly when I know it's ready, and not before. The workshops are completing some component modifications, and the Chipmunk is ready to go, bar a whiff of panel paint. Exhibitors at the show start to arrive and assemble their displays. This Rand Robinson KR2 is one of a number of the new breed of Homebuilts, with sophisticated features such as retracting undercarriages, and of composite spruce, plastic and fiberglass construction. Tents, stalls, machinery and aircraft arriving start to fill the areas designated. As in other years, a wide variety of aircraft is expected, including this SE-5A replica as an example of aviation's early history and one of the airplanes to be displayed during the show. The de Havilland Vampire arrives, an example of an early jet trainer, and also reputed to be the first jet aircraft to take off and land from an aircraft carrier back in 1945. The Warbirds Harvards are accompanied by the de Havilland Doves, bringing the Warbirds engineers to maintain the veterans during the airshow. Meanwhile, work on the P40 engine continues. The Allison 1325 horsepowered V12 liquid-cooled engine has not been run for 40 years. This non-flying example of the 1933 Flying Flea is owned by Gerald Rhodes of Christchurch. It's an early attempt at providing a light, cheap, easy to build and fly aircraft for the amateur constructor. A wide variety of engines were fitted, but the design was not a success, partly due to a serious aerodynamic fault. On testing at the Farnborough Wind Tunnel, it was found that with incidence angles of in excess of 15 degrees, the nose could not be raised, even with the stick hard back. The design was subsequently banned worldwide, which was a good thing as a number were involved in accidents. However, the want for a cheap home-built has not diminished, and even nowadays aeronautical innovators such as Bert Rutan of Quickies fame still experiment with and invent new concepts in amateur design. Meanwhile, back at the P40 Kittyhawk, engineer Ray Mulqueen casts an experienced eye over the instrument panel in preparation for the first engine run-up. The Allison 1710 was an alternative engine to the Rolls-Royce Merlin, an engine of approximately the same dimensions and marginally less powerful. The aircraft is thoroughly restrained by chocks and large gauge safety strops anchored into a purpose-built concrete slab to prevent an unscheduled takeoff. Test complete, all that remains is a check of the systems and hydraulics. The P40 is returned to the hangar to be readied for a test flight.
Decide what time you want to do your display practice and come and see me and we'll coordinate times at that point. We'll just jot them down on a bit of paper and try and if you can have you practicing before 3 o'clock this afternoon?
Practice day is an important part of the airshow preparation. Pilots participating must be familiar with the terrain and approaches and surrounding landmarks, and need that final polish to enable the show day to proceed smoothly. Air shows are a continuous affair, timed and controlled by experienced aviators and Warbird members. The Roaring Forties team, although they have regular practices, still have one last go through their routine before parking the aircraft in the demonstration parking area. The RNZAF presence is stronger this year than at the other two air shows, and the approach of the Iroquois helicopter heralds the arrival of the Royal New Zealand Air Force contingent, including the Aeromacchi MB339CB, one of the first 3 brought into service by the RNZAF in 1991. This is followed by an example of the Strike Master, the second generation jet trainer which the Aeromacchi replaces. The Strike Master is to be used in an aerobatic demonstration of its capabilities on show day. The Aeromacchi MB339 is an Italian design, which the Italian Air Force decided to adopt in the Viper-powered version, similar to that seen here. The forward fuselage design permits the rear instructor's seat to be elevated above that of the pupil, and the elegant tandem canopy provides an all-round view. The aircraft is fitted with Martin Baker 00 ejection seats, which must give the occupants great confidence. The Aeromacchi is equipped with the latest in modern avionics and has strike capability. The de Havilland Company's Canadian division at Downsview, Ontario, was given the responsibility for producing a 2-seater monoplane trainer using as many Tiger Moth parts as possible, and to be able to convert pilots to Spitfire types, as very few dual-seat Spits were built. Oddly enough, the Chipmunk retains many of the characteristics of the fighter mark, with the tail swing on takeoff, and from a rear seat view, the long nose and reduced forward vision of a Spitfire. In fact, flying the Chipmunk from the rear seat is very similar to flying the fighter, especially on landing and takeoff. The aircraft has a wingspan of 34.5 feet and is powered by a 145 horsepower de Havilland Gypsy Major 10 Mark II. At the practice day, the duo team fly together with the paint barely dry on Tim Wallace's Chipmunk. For duties requiring transport of personnel for special occasions, such as the Kiwi Blue Parachute Team, the Royal New Zealand Air Force has 10 XRAF BAE Andovers. These were delivered in the late 70s and operate throughout New Zealand, the South Pacific and Southeast Asia. Providing advanced flying training for student pilots and operational training for pilots destined to fly the Skyhawks was the BAE Strike Master of No. 4 Squadron. Although this aircraft is now being phased out, as can be seen by these practice aeros, the Strike Master still has a capability that's quite spectacular. Show day dawns dull and cloudy, with a promise of cloud lifting by noon and a crisp but sunny afternoon. With the final touches being made to the P40, vehicles in place for the later air attack, the show's about to begin.
Welcome, to Wanaka, Warbirds out of Wanaka 1992, and I don't think we could have been blessed with better weather. We got the dust laid yesterday, and if the sun comes out a bit quicker, we'll burn this top layer off. Well, I think one of the things I must say is that I've got to just say congratulations to the Alpine engineers. I don't think how you can get anything finer than that. It was 4 years ago that I picked that up in pieces. And it was upside down in the Aleutian Islands. They say the pilot was still in it when they got it out, but I didn't see that part of it. But the aircraft relocated here, and I would never believe it's such a hard job actually putting one of those back together when you've just got to scour the world for all the detail parts you need. But anyway, congratulations to them.
The display line today is the northern edge of the runway. So I expect that all airborne manoeuvres will be carried out north of the northern edge of the runway. Obviously the runway is available for takeoff and landings and any part of the show that involves use of the runway. As far as coordination goes, I'd like people to make their start call, and I'd like start call, taxi call, and any other problems or coordination requirements, make those in 1191 please. All turns to be away from the display line. No flying over spectators. No passengers to be carried unless they are an integral part of the show or required to operate the aeroplane. Minimum heights, straight from the CASO for low-level runs, 100 feet AGL for aerobatics, 500 feet AGL, or if your own personal minimum is higher than that, then that's what you must adhere to.
It's impossible to list the achievements of the de Havilland Moth Mark, from the DH-60 Cirrus Moth to the DH-82 Tiger Moth. The Gypsy dates back to 1925, and it was only the position of the top wing that precluded it from being selected as the Royal Air Force trainer. The upright Gypsy 100 horsepower inline 4 was inverted and developed to become the Gypsy Major 130 horsepower, and the wings were swept back to correct the centre of gravity, and the Tiger Moth was born. Thousands were built, and hundreds are still flying throughout the world. With a basic instrument panel layout, they need to be flown at all times. The type has established itself to such a degree that it's now regarded as the epitome of vintage aircraft, even among the non-aviation minded public. A group of Tigers fly past prior to a display of Tiger manoeuvres by Simon Spencer Bauer in Tim Wallace's Alpine Collection example. The Chipmunk bears little resemblance to the Tiger Moth that it was designed to replace. And apart from the Gypsy Major Mark II engine, has few of the characteristics of a Tiger in flight. It has a cockpit layout that's familiar, but the smoothness of response and the design of the airframe has delighted pilots. And with the installation of larger engines, the aerobatic performance becomes quite spectacular. Some of which can be seen during this display by Ian Reynolds and Peter Creedon in Gypsy-powered Chipmunks. Another product of de Havilland Canada's design team is the D8C2 Beaver. The prototype flew in 1947 and sold in large numbers, especially to the US Air Force. This aircraft was intended for bush operation in the Canadian backblocks and was a very utilitarian design with no unnecessary parts to interfere with its intended role as the aviation equivalent of a truck. Its short takeoff and landing capabilities and slow flight is demonstrated here by Peter Rhodes.
With all the souvenirs available there, the TOs, t-shirts, badges, that's down front right of St John's ambulance to one side of the broadcast box. A lot of people have been asking about those jackets too, Wayne, and we can report that they do have them down there. Roger that, so a delightful jacket, $65 each now.
The P40 has now been passed A-OK by Ray Mulqueen. The restoration team is about to see the results of 4 years' sweat and toil. Mark Hanna of the Old Flying Machine Company takes the 40-year-old but brand new Kittyhawk for its test flight. This site is one which will not be seen again, certainly not at an air show, which is not by choice the place to test an expensive piece of fine machinery. The Hiller, Hughes 500 and Robinson R22s of the local helicopter operators fly by for the crowd, in a scene reminiscent of the opening of the MASH television series. The Robinson R22 is demonstrated in a dual team display by Doug Maxwell and Harvey Hutton. The R22 was designed to be a lightweight civil helicopter which would be competitive in price with a two-seat fixed-wing aircraft, and it's achieved that goal to a large degree. It's become very popular in New Zealand as a general-purpose chopper, being relatively inexpensive to operate. The Hughes 500, originally designed in 1960 as a replacement for the Hiller and Bell light observation helicopters, is seen here. It's displayed by Tim Wallace and Dennis Edgerton. The Hughes 500 is unique in its innovative rotor design and simple power plant servicing. And for many years it's been the workhorse of the sky for New Zealand's deer recovery industry. The Hiller, of course, predates both of these previous machines, and an early model HH-12 was the first helicopter to record a transcontinental flight across the United States of America. More than 2,000 were built before production ended in 1965. The Polish-built PZL-104 Wilga may look like a vintage aircraft, but it is in fact a very modern special-purpose machine, designed in 1962, but still in production. This example is the first imported into New Zealand by Doug Dallison of Alternate Aviation. The Wilga is a versatile performer with a wingspan of 36.5 feet, and a range of 416 miles at 110 miles an hour. It's propelled by a 260 horsepower PZL 9-cylinder radial, turning an 8'6" wooden constant speed propeller. This combination gives the aircraft its throaty growl that's somewhat subdued by the huge silencers slung under the cabin. With leading edge slots, drooping ailerons and very effective flaps, the Vilga will leap into the air from 0 to about 50 feet, much like a helicopter. In fact, this aircraft will perform many of the tasks of a helicopter, but at a fraction of the cost. Because of its rough field capability, it's being evaluated as a surveillance aircraft by the New Zealand Police Department. The AgCat originated from the Grumman Company, and it's a thoroughly workmanlike agricultural aircraft. It's now manufactured under license by the Schweitzer Company. This 42.5-foot wingspan biplane is powered by a 600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine. One of the features of this design is the pressurized cockpit, which prevents the ingress of toxic chemicals while spraying or top dressing. The front cockpit is also capable of carrying passengers when not in use for agricultural purposes. The 600 horsepower Avco Lycoming turboprop powers this logical development of the old Fletcher Fu-24 agricultural aircraft, which was in continuous production since 1955. The name Cresco is Latin for I grow, appropriate for an agricultural machine. Many of the components are interchangeable with the original design. However, some structural refinement was required for the fitting of the turboprop engine. This allows an increase in takeoff weight from 1,032 kilograms to 1,851 kilograms. The prototype Cresco flew in 1980 and is displayed here by Malcolm Hill of Farmers Aerial Top Dressing Limited. The Field Air Fletcher Fu-24 utility aircraft, flown by Mark Houston, is marked by the much noisier 400 horsepower Lycoming flat 8 piston engine. Many hectares of New Zealand farmland owes its productivity to the fertiliser dispersed by this design, which has seen service in many countries in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Reminiscent of the 1930s barnstorming days, the Ag Cat tows a banner proclaiming a product well known in New Zealand. A category growing in numbers in New Zealand is the home-built aircraft, especially the replica types. One of the better known of World War I fighters is the SE-5A. Seen here in 7/10 scale design with wood and fabric construction, it's flown for the display by Tom Grant. The English-designed Isaac's Fury is a 7/10 scale of the Hawker Fury, a between-the-wars fighter. It's also wood and fabric in construction. Wingspan's only 21 feet for the top wing and 18 feet for the lower wing. This is powered by a 125 horsepower Lycoming. It has a sprightly performance with a rate of climb of 1,600 feet per minute. The range is rather restricted at 100 miles, so refuelling is required frequently on long cross-country flights. The replica SE-5 has a cruise speed of 75 miles an hour, but a greater range than the Fury at 300 miles. Dan Denny, president of the Denny Aircraft Company, came to Wanaka to enjoy the airshow, but also to demonstrate his award-winning Kitfox. This aeroplane is a short-field, two-place recreational design with flapper-ons for low-speed responsiveness. It has fold-back wings, so it can be towed by the family car. The aeroplane looks antique, but incorporates all the technology that a modern design has available. The round cowl and the balloon-style wheels set it apart from the Taylorcraft or the Cub lookalikes. A home-built of totally different concept is the Thorpe T18 Tiger, a natty little 20-foot span machine powered by a 180 horsepower flat-4 engine. Designed by John Thorpe, the T18 has been one of the most popular home-built light aircraft for amateur construction. Hundreds have been completed around the world, and with a cruising speed of 175 miles an hour, with two side by side, it's a very practical means of transport, as well as being a delightful aeroplane to fly. Internationally renowned as an aerobatic aircraft, the Pitts Special was until recently the standard mount of the United States and British World Aerobatic Championship teams. Yet despite its current attractions, the origins go back to the time of the Second World War, when Curtis Pitts first flew his new design. The year was 1944. Seen here on practice day, Richard Hood performs his aerobatic routine without smoke, which gives a clear view of the control surfaces and the resultant attitudes of the aircraft. From -3G to +4G forces are imposed on both the pilot and machine, and the aircraft is stressed to withstand much greater G forces than the human body. The single-seat S1, flown by John Kelly, has an upper wingspan of only 17.5 feet, and it's powered by a 180 horsepower flat four Lycoming.
Taking off off the runway are the two test vehicles flown by Richard and John Kelly.
No circus is complete without the clowns, and this air show is no exception. Phil Murray makes the clown routine look easy, but as with other air shows that he flies at, many hours of practice are needed to give this impression. The prototype Pilatus Porter flew in 1959 and was a very successful design in its own right. In 1962, the turbo-powered version was developed. Since that time, the Porter's been progressively improved with refinements and new equipment to enhance its versatility. The Mount Cook Airlines Turbo Porter, displayed by Phil Cooney, is equipped with skis for glacier landings. The short takeoff and landing capabilities are shown here in very slow speed passes, which this design's well known for. manoeuvre for easy parking helps in tight situations. The Britten-Norman Islander was originally proposed as a replacement for the ageing DH Dragon Rapide, and in 1965 the prototype flew, attracting considerable interest. Unique in concept is the high-density seating arrangement, contrived in a cabin of only 1.1 metres width. The Britten-Norman Islander numerically was the most important civil aircraft produced in the UK since World War II. The de Havilland DH-89B Domini, operated by the Croydon Aircraft Company, is typical of English 1930s air transport thinking. This marque served in New Zealand as a main trunk and third-tier airliner until the mid-60s. De Havilland's first post-war civil design was the DH-104 Devon in the military version and the Dove in its civil guise. It was intended as a replacement for the ageing Domini, and the prototype Dove flew in 1945. The power plants were Gypsy Queens, but with supercharging producing double the output at 380 horsepower. Several innovations were incorporated in the new model. Apart from its monoplane configuration with a retracting undercarriage, it had fully feathering, pitch-reversible propellers. The Royal New Zealand Air Force were rather taken by this new aircraft, as it seems, for they purchased 30, and the Devon remained in service for 30 years. Like the Rapide, which it had superseded, the Devon proved to be reliable and popular, and the de Havilland factory had built 542 of them when production stopped in 1968. The Douglas DC-3, or C-47 in its military version, was the result of a request by the American Airlines president for a larger, more luxurious version of the DC-2, and the Dakota was originally designed as a sleeper with 14 berths. Subsequently, with the increase in air travel numbers, it was realised that a 21-seat daytime liner was more profitable. The prototype DC-3 first flew in 1936 and was built in large numbers, even being licensed to be built in Japan and the Soviet Union. By 1940, a transport aircraft was required for the United States Air Force, and modifications were made for the military specification, principally in a stronger cabin floor, loading doors, and 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitneys replacing the original 900 horsepower Wright Cyclones. The design and handling of the Dakota is one of those happy combinations where, despite the relatively narrow commercial reasons in its conception, it's perhaps the perfect aircraft, certainly beloved by those who flew this during the war and subjected the airframe to abuse and loadings for which it was never designed. Warbirds Dakota was imported from Queensland, not before the Warbirds team sent to prepare the aircraft for its acceptance flight had debugged it. They sprayed every accessible hole with aerosol insect spray and even found a wasp's nest inside the elevator.
And we use basically for navigational training, signals training, commuter work, and all the transport operations. So from our left we have now a high-speed run to Devon.
first Iroquois helicopters were delivered to the RNZAF in 1966. The type's been in service ever since. The latest version, the Bell Model 105, is a long fuselage and can accommodate up to 14 men and equipment in addition to the pilot. It's subject to a continuous improvement program with advanced avionics extending its design life. As this display shows, the Iroquois is a versatile and very manoeuvrable machine, despite its bulkiness. The Roaring Forties Harvard display team began not as a planned airshow routine, but evolved from the Sunday flying that the Harvard owners did as a group to achieve joy at the grace and harmony of aerobatics that a relatively slow but powerful aircraft can give. The Harvard as an aircraft is an ideal spectator vehicle, as it has that characteristic spine-tingling roar that very few modern aircraft exhibit. The names of a Harvard are diverse and prolific, due to the many countries that assembled or purchased them. Names such as Texan, Wirraway, the Swedes SK-14, or to the Japanese a K-5Y, and even the Luftwaffe knew it as the NAA-57. The Roaring Forties display is highly coordinated, and John Lamont as the leader has briefed the team prior to them taking off. Starting life as an Avro 748 in 1958, the Andover evolved to the larger, more powerful aircraft under the Hawker-Siddeley Group. The Royal New Zealand Air Force's Andovers were bought to replace the Bristol Freighter and Dakota as medium-range transport aircraft. These Andovers were in service in the Royal Air Force between 1965 and 67 and were sold as a result of British defence cuts. At the Airshow, the Andover will be used as a platform for the Kiwi Blue Parachute Display Team, led by Squadron Leader Bob Howard. The de Havilland Vampire was the Royal New Zealand Air Force's first operational jet. It was in service in greater numbers than any other aircraft, at that time some 58 being on the establishment list. Ross Ewing and John Peterson are to display the ex-Royal Australian Air Force Vampire TL, being quite similar to the ones operated by the Royal New Zealand Air Force. The Vampire was conceived in 1941 and designed around the Rolls-Royce Goblin turbojet to Air Ministry specifications. Originally named the Spider Crab, the DH-100 prototype flew in 1943. And the first production Vampire flew only 3 weeks before the war ended. It was the third jet aircraft to fly and was the RAF's first single jet, remaining in service for 30 years and still remains Britain's all-time best-selling jet aircraft. Following a request by the Egyptian government, a single-seater Vampire was modified by the addition of the nose of a Mosquito Mark 56 being grafted on. The Royal New Zealand Air Force phased out the last of the Vampires in 1973. BAC 167 Mark 88 Strikemaster replaced the Vampire with the first batch of 10 arriving in 1973. It was chosen because of several advantages over previous aircraft. With side-by-side seating, the pilot and student use the same set of instruments, and with a tailpipe parallel to the ground, this aeroplane can be safely operated from a grass runway without the danger of igniting the grass. Although not as fast as the Vampire, its climb rate is greater. The Strikemaster is also considered more docile than the Vampire at low speeds and is a pleasant aircraft to aerobat. The display by the Royal New Zealand Air Force demonstrates these capabilities well. The RNZAF has had aerobatic teams since the late 40s, using 4 Harvards. For many years, the Red Checkers performed at air shows throughout New Zealand, and with the retirement of the Harvards and the oil crisis, they were put into recess until the 80s. The new Red Checkers, using the Victor Air Trainer CT4B with a 210 horsepower engine, was reformed, and they thrilled the crowds once again. The Victor Air Trainer seats 2 pilots side by side with rear seat space for a passenger. Its systems are relatively complicated, as transition to the more advanced Skyhawk and other operational aircraft is the requirement. The Red Checkers formation team is renowned for a spectacular manoeuvre known as the mirror formation, and that's performed during the display, led by squadron leader Ian McClellan. Mark Hanna has tested the Kittyhawk and is satisfied with its performance. After consultation with Tim Wallace, he's preparing to put the aircraft through its paces in a display that very few of the crowd present would have seen before. The Curtiss P40 served during most of the Second World War with one Air Force or another, and under several different names, including Tomahawk and Kittyhawk in Britain and Warhawk in the United States. The RNZAF received its first 44 Kittyhawks in 1942 and 43. A substantial number arrived in New Zealand. They were used in the Pacific Theatre as defensive fighters and as dive bombers and bomber escorts. The Curtiss P40K that Mark's flying is certainly as good as any that was produced during the war.
He's shifted his line of sight to the side of the runway because he can't see over that nose. That's one thing about a fighter, you just cannot see over the nose. There's a Spitfire just started behind the side thing. He's looking out the side, you can see the tail movement, the wheels, it's a very short couple of aircraft.
The Chance Vought Aircraft Company submitted a revolutionary design for a high-speed, single-seat, high-altitude seaborne fighter. Many of the characteristics of the Corsair were due to the innovative concepts used. For example, the bent wing is present because of the huge 13-foot 4-inch propeller used to absorb the power of the 2,804 cubic inch Pratt & Whitney double wasp radial engine. The Corsair was the heaviest piston engine fighter aircraft of World War II and has been dived to a speed of 610 miles an hour. Tom Middleton displays the Whispering Death, as the Japanese named it. The prototype Sea Fury flew in 1945, and the Mark saw service in the Korean War pitted against the Soviet MiG-15 jet fighter. This particular aircraft was one of 60 purchased by the Iraqis during the early 1950s and was in service for 10 years. For such a large, heavy aircraft, it's quite light to handle as the controls are servo-assisted with tabs, and it's a pleasure to fly. Robbie Booth flies the Sea Fury at Wanaka, and the sound and sight of the Bristol Centaurus-powered machine is a wonder to behold. Fuel consumption would delight an oil sheikh at 900 litres per hour during the airshow routine. Memories of the Battle of Britain, the conflict of man and machine, one-on-one. Perhaps the days when battles were won honourably, and the lethal beauty of the machines of war can now be admired.
Basically, this airplane's painted up at the moment as a chap called Munchberg's aircraft. He was a very successful fighter pilot, both in the Battle of Britain and then immediately after. And this is actually painted right now when his squadron deployed to Malta in 1941 to fight the British fighters that were defending Malta. You can see here on the rudder, at this point, he had 60 kills here over the British, and he'd had a short deployment to Russia before he went to Malta. And this symbol here means he's been awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves at 60 kills. And then subsequently, he now continues to tote up his score. So 61, 62, 63, etc., etc. When he gets his next medal, or he runs out of rudder, they then paint out this lot again, and you put 100 or 150 or 200 or however many he's got. And this is how the Germans kept their kill scoreboards on their airplanes. And the squadron emblem for his squadron is the red heart. Okay, so it's Munchberg's aircraft because of the arrowhead. Yep. It's the wing is Jägerschwader 26, and the squadron, which I think was the 9th squadron within that wing, is the red heart.
About 35,000 Messerschmitt Bf-109s were built. This specimen, a 109G, but of Spanish manufacture, is exported as the J series, and it completes the circle, as the original design of Willy Messerschmitt that flew in September 1935 was powered with a Rolls-Royce motor, a Kestrel Mark V of 695 horsepower.
When you're doing a demonstration dogfight, of course, it's choreographed, is it, or?
Yes, it's basically choreographed, but in addition to it being choreographed, we will improvise as well. So in other words, it's not rock solid. We don't stick to a certain guaranteed number of patterns. Sometimes, depending on the terrain and depending on how much speed you might have or something like that, or you just might see a good opportunity or an advantage to shoot somebody else down. So say there's 4 airplanes and you're fighting one other particular guy, but then there's an opportunity to have somebody else, you'll have the other person as well. But there's a lot of chat going on the radio, very concise
chat, but nonetheless chat, discussing what's going on. So the basic thing is choreographed, but we improvise as well, rather a lot. Yeah, I mean, if it's the real thing, you go for it, or disengage, depending on how you see the situation. Fighting a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt, I would definitely not try to dogfight with him. I'd keep the speed up in the Messerschmitt, and I'd look for opportunities to shoot a Spitfire, but I wouldn't get into any turning sort of fight with him at all. It would be disastrous. So, in a way, airshow dogfights are a little bit artificial, because any good German fighter pilot would not be getting into a turning fight with a Spitfire, because the Spitfire is all over it in a turning fight.
Right.
What you do is you actually keep the speed of this thing stoked up, and in a real fight, and you transfer your speed to height, and then height to speed again. So you do a series of slashing, vertical type attacks is really where this airplane excels. It accelerates very fast in the dive, climbs rather well as well. It does turn well compared with most World War II fighters, but not compared to the Spitfire. So if you're fighting a Mustang or something, I'd be very happy to get mixed up in a tight turning fight with a Mustang, but not the Spitfire. Definitely not a Spitfire.
The Supermarine Company at the time of the Spitfire test had only built 137 aircraft, most walrus amphibians. And it was the genius of designer Reginald Mitchell that made what became a legend a reality. Ray Hanna and son Mark of the old flying machine company are about to give a demonstration dogfight that's thrilled airshow crowds in Europe and in the UK. Naturally, in keeping with the spirit of the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire always wins. Air shows are for people, and 50,000 turned up on Easter Saturday, causing a 10-kilometre line of cars from 6:30 in the morning. With the finale about to begin, the aircraft move out. The 109 and the Harvards to attack and bomb the airfield, and the good guys in the Spitfire, Fury, Corsair and Vampire to defend. The air attack is fast and furious and leaves no doubt that the planes are being flown by very competent aviators having fun. So it's contact, chocks away and on with the show, and onward to the 1994 Warbirds over Wanaka.